The morning mist hung low over the manicured gardens of Windsor Castle as Dr. Margaret Thornfield walked briskly through the corridors she had navigated for nearly 2 decades. Her footsteps echoed against the ancient stone walls, each step carrying the weight of knowledge that would soon change everything. The ornate grandfather clock in the east wing chimed 6 times, its resonant tone marking not just the early hour, but what would later be remembered as the moment everything shifted. Dr. Thornfield had been the royal family's primary physician since 2008, appointed after a distinguished career at London's most prestigious hospitals. She had delivered babies, treated minor ailments, and managed the discreet health concerns that came with a life lived constantly in the public eye. But nothing in her medical training or years of royal service had prepared her for the conversation she was about to have. The test results had arrived at 4:30 a.m., delivered by secure courier from the private laboratory in Harley Street. The manila envelope bore the laboratory's official seal, and the marking that indicated its contents required immediate attention. Dr. Thornfield had opened it in her private office, her experienced eyes quickly scanning the technical language that told a story no medical professional ever wanted to deliver to a patient, especially when that patient wore a crown. King Edward VII sat in his private study, surrounded by the leather-bound books and family photographs that had provided comfort through decades of public service. At 68, he had ruled for 15 years, guiding the nation through economic uncertainty, political upheaval, and social change with the steady hand that his subjects had come to rely upon. His morning routine rarely varied. Wake at 5:30, review overnight dispatches from the Prime Minister's office, and prepare for a day of carefully scheduled engagements that would take him from London to Edinburgh and back again. The King's personal secretary, James Morrison, had served the royal household for 23 years. He possessed an intuitive understanding of palace protocol and the delicate balance required to manage both state business and family affairs. When Dr. Thornfield requested an immediate private audience with His Majesty, Morrison recognized the gravity in her voice. Such requests were rare, and when they came, they typically preceded announcements that required careful management. Queen Isabella had been in the Rose Garden when the call came. She had awakened early, as was her custom, to tend to the flowers that had become her passion project since becoming queen consort. The garden represented something purely her own in a life where every public moment was choreographed, and every private thought seemed to belong to the nation. She had been examining the new climbing roses, imported from the famous gardens of Versailles, when her lady-in-waiting approached with the message that her presence was urgently requested in the king's study. The royal couple had been married for 42 years, their relationship having evolved from the arranged introduction of their youth into a partnership that had weathered the storms of public scrutiny, family scandals, and the relentless pressure of constitutional monarchy. They had raised 3 children together, each now carrying their own royal responsibilities, and had become grandparents to 7 grandchildren who brought joy to their increasingly formal lives. Prince William, the heir apparent, was in Scotland conducting a series of engagements focused on environmental conservation. His work with renewable energy initiatives had earned international recognition and represented the monarchy's effort to remain relevant to younger generations increasingly concerned about climate change. He had inherited his father's sense of duty, but brought a more informal approach to royal obligations, often surprising security details by stopping to speak with ordinary citizens during official visits. Princess Charlotte, the king's only daughter, served as patron of numerous charities focused on children's welfare and education. Her work had taken her to some of the world's most challenging environments, from refugee camps in Jordan to schools in rural Kenya. She possessed her mother's grace and her father's determination, qualities that had made her enormously popular with both the media and the public. On this particular morning, she was reviewing proposals for a new initiative that would provide educational technology to underserved communities throughout the Commonwealth. Prince Michael, the youngest of the royal children, had chosen a path that blended royal duty with business acumen. His investment firm focused on sustainable technologies and had achieved remarkable success while maintaining the ethical standards required of a royal enterprise. He lived a more private life than his siblings, though he dutifully appeared at state functions and supported various charitable causes. He was known for his quick wit and ability to connect with people from all backgrounds, a skill that had proved invaluable during foreign diplomatic missions. The palace staff had noticed subtle changes in the king's behavior over the past several months. His energy levels seemed diminished, and he had begun delegating more responsibilities to his children than was typical. The Queen had privately expressed concerns to Dr. Thornfield during routine checkups, noting that her husband's appetite had decreased, and he seemed to tire more easily during long ceremonial events. These observations had prompted additional testing, the results of which now demanded immediate attention. Dr. Thornfield knocked on the study door at precisely 7 o'clock, as scheduled. The king's voice, still strong despite recent concerns, called for her to enter. She found him seated behind the mahogany desk that had served monarchs for over a century, the morning light filtering through tall windows and casting shadows across documents marked with the official seals of state. The Queen sat in her usual chair beside the fireplace, her hands folded in her lap in a gesture that Dr. Thornfield recognized as a sign of barely contained anxiety. The physician's training had taught her to deliver difficult news with directness tempered by compassion. She had informed families of terminal diagnoses, explained complex treatment options to frightened patients, and guided loved ones through the most challenging moments of their lives. But, sitting across from the sovereign, surrounded by portraits of monarchs who had ruled for centuries, she felt the full weight of how this news would extend far beyond this private room. The test results confirmed what the symptoms had suggested. The king was facing a serious health challenge that would require immediate and intensive treatment. The specific nature of the diagnosis would need to be carefully managed, both medically and politically. Constitutional law required that Parliament be informed of any condition that might affect the monarch's ability to fulfill royal duties. The Prime Minister would need to be briefed. The Commonwealth nations would require official notification. The media would demand answers to questions that balanced public interest with personal privacy. Dr. Thornfield began with the clinical facts, explaining the test results in terms that were medically accurate but accessible to patients without medical training. She outlined the treatment options available, the timeline for decision-making, and the likely prognosis based on current medical knowledge. The king listened with the same focused attention he brought to briefings on matters of state, occasionally asking questions that demonstrated his understanding of both the medical and constitutional implications of his situation. Queen Isabella's composure never wavered, though Dr. Thornfield noticed the slight tremor in her hands that suggested the emotional impact of the news. The Queen asked practical questions about treatment schedules, recovery timelines, and how the medical needs might be balanced with existing royal commitments. Her questions revealed not just personal concern for her husband's welfare, but the deep understanding of constitutional responsibility that had guided her role as queen consort for over 4 decades. The conversation lasted nearly an hour, covering medical details, treatment options, and the complex logistics of managing a monarch's health care while maintaining the stability and continuity that constitutional monarchy required. Dr. Thornfield provided written materials for their review and scheduled follow-up appointments that would begin the treatment process. She also discussed the need for additional medical consultations with specialists who possessed security clearance for treating members of the royal family. As the meeting concluded, the king stood and walked to the window overlooking the gardens where Queen Isabella had been working just hours earlier. The morning mist had lifted, revealing the carefully maintained grounds that stretched toward the Thames. He stood silently for several moments, perhaps contemplating the irony that while he commanded one of the world's most advanced medical systems, he faced the same uncertainties and fears as any patient receiving life-altering news. The Queen joined her husband at the window, their hands finding each other in a gesture that spoke of decades of partnership through both triumph and challenge. Dr. Thornfield quietly gathered her materials and prepared to leave, knowing that the royal couple needed time to process the information privately before the complex machinery of palace communication began the delicate process of managing this crisis. James Morrison waited outside the study, his expression carefully neutral despite his recognition that whatever had transpired during the past hour would likely reshape palace operations for the foreseeable future. His experience had taught him to read the subtle signs that indicated when royal business shifted from routine to exceptional, and the atmosphere surrounding this morning's meeting clearly fell into the latter category. The palace communications team would soon need to craft statements that balanced transparency with privacy, constitutional requirements with family concerns. The king's private secretaries would need to review the constitutional protocols that govern situations where a monarch's health might affect their ability to fulfill official duties. The security services would need to adjust their planning to accommodate medical appointments and potential treatment schedules. Dr. Thornfield made her way back through the corridors, her mind already turning to the medical protocols and security arrangements that would be required for the treatment ahead. She had treated members of the royal family through various health challenges, but never had the stakes been quite so high or the implications quite so far-reaching. The diagnosis would require not just medical expertise, but careful coordination between the palace, the government, and the medical institutions that would provide specialized care. The castle seemed different as she walked toward her office to begin the phone calls that would set the medical response in motion. The same tapestries hung on the walls, the same portraits of long-dead monarchs gazed down from their gilded frames, but everything had shifted in some fundamental way. History was about to be written, and she was one of the few people who knew that the first chapter had just begun. Outside, the early morning staff began their daily routines, unaware that within the castle walls, conversations were already beginning that would soon command the attention of the nation and the world. The groundskeepers continued their work on the gardens, the kitchen staff prepared breakfast according to long-standing schedules, and the security teams maintained their vigilant watch, all proceeding with the comfortable assumption that this day would unfold much like any other. But inside the king's study, two people who had devoted their lives to service and duty faced a challenge that would test not just their personal strength, but the very foundations of the institution they represented. The morning sun continued to rise over Windsor Castle, just as it had for nearly 1,000 years, but the shadows it cast were different now, shaped by knowledge that would soon transform everything. The secure telephone line crackled to life at 9:47 a.m. as the king's private secretary placed the most difficult call of his 23-year career. On the other end of the line, Prime Minister Sarah Richardson was reviewing economic forecasts in her Downing Street study when her personal secretary knocked urgently on the door. The constitutional protocols were clear. Certain information required immediate communication between the palace and the government, regardless of the political implications or timing. Prime Minister Richardson had served in various government positions for 18 years before assuming leadership of her party and, subsequently, the nation. She possessed the political instincts and constitutional knowledge necessary to navigate the complex relationship between elected government and hereditary monarchy. Her administration had maintained positive relations with the royal family, respecting both the formal requirements of constitutional law and the informal traditions that helped ensure governmental stability. The conversation between Palace and Downing Street lasted exactly 12 minutes, during which time the fundamental dynamics of British governance shifted in ways that would not become apparent to the public for several hours. Constitutional law required that the Prime Minister be informed of any health condition that might affect the monarch's ability to fulfill the duties of state. The implications extended beyond mere protocol. Parliament needed to understand whether legislative business might be affected, the Commonwealth nations required notification, and the complex machinery of modern constitutional monarchy needed to prepare for potential adjustments. Meanwhile, at Windsor Castle, Queen Isabella sat in her private drawing room, surrounded by the family photographs and personal mementos that provided comfort during moments of crisis. She held a list of telephone numbers written in her own careful handwriting, each representing a conversation that would prove increasingly difficult as the morning progressed. The first call would be to Prince William in Scotland, where he was midway through a series of environmental engagements that had captured significant media attention. Prince William had inherited his father's sense of constitutional duty, but brought a more contemporary approach to royal responsibilities. His work on environmental issues had earned respect from younger generations, often skeptical of traditional institutions, and his informal style had helped modernize the public perception of monarchy. He was inspecting a wind farm installation near Edinburgh when his private secretary received the urgent message requesting immediate contact with Queen Isabella. The helicopter ride back to Edinburgh Airport gave Prince William 30 minutes to consider the possibilities that might prompt such an urgent summons. His experience as heir apparent had taught him to recognize the subtle signs that indicated when family business intersected with constitutional responsibility. The formal language of the message suggested something beyond routine family concerns, and his understanding of palace protocol told him that interrupting official engagements required serious justification. Princess Charlotte was in her London office when the call came, reviewing funding proposals for educational initiatives in rural Kenya. Her charitable work had taken her to some of the world's most challenging environments, experiences that had given her perspective on both privilege and responsibility. She possessed her mother's grace under pressure and had often served as an unofficial family mediator during previous crises. Her immediate response to her mother's request demonstrated the reflexive obedience to family duty that royal training had instilled since childhood. Prince Michael's investment meeting in the city was interrupted by his security detail, who delivered the message with the professional discretion that royal protection officers had perfected over decades of service. He had been reviewing sustainable technology portfolios with his business partners, work that represented his effort to balance royal duty with meaningful economic contribution. His quick mind immediately grasped that family emergencies serious enough to interrupt business meetings typically involved either security threats or health crises. The royal children's responses to their mother's summons revealed personalities shaped by decades of public service, but expressed through individual approaches to duty and family loyalty. Prince William arranged immediate transportation back to Windsor, delegating his remaining Scottish engagements to staff members who understood the constitutional significance of his sudden departure. Princess Charlotte cleared her afternoon schedule and prepared for what her experience suggested would be a family crisis requiring both emotional support and practical planning. Prince Michael's business acumen proved valuable as he quickly assessed the potential implications of various scenarios that might require urgent family consultation. His investment work had given him understanding of how unexpected news could affect both public perception and institutional stability. He began the drive to Windsor while mentally preparing for conversations that might require both family support and strategic thinking. Dr. Thornfield spent the morning coordinating with medical specialists who possessed the security clearances necessary for treating members of the royal family. The National Health Service maintained protocols for royal medical care that balanced the highest standards of treatment with the security and privacy requirements that constitutional monarchy demanded. She contacted the heads of oncology departments at 3 London hospitals, each conversation requiring careful explanation of both medical needs and constitutional sensitivities. The specialist consultations would require unprecedented coordination between medical institutions, security services, and palace communications teams. Dr. Thornfield's experience with royal healthcare had prepared her for the logistical complexities, but the constitutional implications of the king's diagnosis created challenges that extended far beyond normal medical protocols. Treatment schedules would need to accommodate state business, security arrangements would require adjustment for hospital visits, and media management would become a crucial component of the medical care plan. James Morrison convened an emergency meeting of senior palace staff at 11 o'clock, gathering the communications director, the private secretary's office, the security coordinator, and the keeper of the privy purse in the oak-paneled conference room that had hosted countless crisis management sessions throughout the centuries. The meeting operated under the strict confidentiality protocols that governed sensitive palace business, with each participant understanding that premature disclosure could destabilize both the monarchy and the government. The communications challenges were unprecedented in modern royal history. Unlike previous royal health issues that could be managed with brief statements about minor ailments or routine procedures, this situation would require sustained media management over an extended period. The public's right to know needed to be balanced with medical privacy. Constitutional requirements needed to be met without creating political uncertainty, and international implications needed consideration given the king's role as head of the Commonwealth. The palace communications director, Miranda Walsh, had managed royal media relations for 8 years, navigating scandals, celebrations, and the routine challenges of maintaining public support for hereditary institutions in democratic societies. Her experience had taught her that successful crisis management required getting ahead of speculation while maintaining credibility through measured disclosure of accurate information. The king's diagnosis would test every lesson she had learned about balancing transparency with privacy. Security arrangements required immediate review and potential modification. The king's medical treatment would involve travel to London hospitals, consultations with specialists, and potentially extended periods of reduced public engagement. Each element created security challenges that needed to be assessed and addressed while maintaining the discretion that effective protection required. The security coordinator began developing contingency plans that could accommodate various treatment scenarios while preserving operational security. The constitutional implications demanded consultation with officials who rarely dealt with health-related protocols. The keeper of the privy purse began reviewing the legal frameworks that might be activated if the king's condition required delegation of certain royal duties. Historical precedents were researched, legal experts were consulted, and preparations began for potential scenarios that constitutional law anticipated but hoped would never be necessary. Parliamentary notification represented a delicate balance between constitutional requirements and political sensitivities. The Prime Minister would need to inform selected government officials while managing the information in ways that prevented political speculation or constitutional uncertainty. The opposition leaders would require briefing at appropriate times, but the sequence and timing of such notifications required careful coordination between palace and government officials. International implications extended throughout the Commonwealth nations, where the king served as head of state for 15 countries beyond the United Kingdom. The governors-general would require notification, the Commonwealth Secretary-General needed briefing, and diplomatic protocols would need activation to ensure that international partners received appropriate information through official channels before media speculation could create confusion or concern. The Queen's meetings with her children began in the early afternoon, each conversation carefully timed to allow for private family discussion before the broader implications required attention. Prince William arrived first, his helicopter landing on the castle grounds at 1:30 p.m. His immediate request for briefing materials demonstrated the seriousness with which he approached his role as heir apparent, understanding that his father's condition might require him to assume additional responsibilities with little preparation time. Princess Charlotte's arrival 15 minutes later provided the family dynamic that often proved crucial during crisis situations. Her experience mediating family disagreements and her emotional intelligence made her invaluable during conversations that combined personal concerns with constitutional obligations. Her first questions focused on her father's medical prognosis, but she quickly shifted to practical considerations about family coordination and public responsibilities. Prince Michael's arrival completed the family gathering, bringing the business perspective and strategic thinking that complemented his siblings' approaches to family crisis management. His questions about timing, disclosure strategies, and long-term implications reflected understanding that royal family decisions created ripple effects throughout British society and international relations. The three siblings represented different approaches to royal duty, but their shared commitment to family and constitutional responsibility created the foundation for unified response to crisis. The family meeting lasted 2 hours, during which time the king explained his medical situation with the same directness he brought to state business. His approach demonstrated the leadership qualities that had guided the nation through previous challenges, treating his health crisis as another problem requiring careful analysis, strategic planning, and decisive action. His primary concerns focused on minimizing disruption to constitutional functions and ensuring smooth continuation of royal duties regardless of his personal circumstances. Queen Isabella's role during the family meeting revealed the depth of her understanding of both personal and constitutional implications. Her 42 years as queen consort had given her unique perspective on balancing family needs with public responsibilities. She provided emotional support while ensuring that practical considerations received appropriate attention, demonstrating the skills that had made her an invaluable partner in royal duty and an effective leader of family crisis management. The afternoon meeting established the framework for family coordination during the coming challenges. Responsibilities were allocated based on individual strengths and existing role assignments. Communication protocols were established for ongoing family coordination, and preliminary decisions were made about public engagement schedules that might require modification. The family's response demonstrated both the personal bonds that had sustained them through decades of public scrutiny and the professional competence required for constitutional monarchy. As evening approached, Windsor Castle settled into patterns that appeared normal to outside observers, but concealed the intensive planning and coordination that had consumed the entire day. The king maintained his evening schedule of reviewing government papers and conducting routine business, determined to demonstrate that his diagnosis would not immediately affect his ability to fulfill constitutional duties. His approach sent clear signals to both family and staff about his expectations for continuity and normalcy despite the changed circumstances. The sunset over Windsor Castle on this particular evening marked the end of a day that had fundamentally altered the trajectory of the monarchy, the government, and the nation itself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the carefully planned communication strategy began implementation, but tonight provided a brief interval for family unity and private preparation before public responsibility resumed its demands. The Buckingham Palace press office had never experienced a morning quite like this one. Miranda Walsh arrived at her desk at 6:30 a.m. to find 17 missed calls from major news organizations, 43 urgent emails from royal correspondents, and a growing social media frenzy sparked by unconfirmed reports that something significant was happening within the royal family. The challenge facing her was unprecedented. How to control a narrative that hadn't yet begun while preparing for an announcement that would dominate global headlines for months to come. The rumors had started the previous evening when sharp-eyed photographers noticed unusual activity around Windsor Castle. Security vehicles that typically remained discreet had become more visible. Additional personnel had been spotted at various entrances, and the sudden cancellation of several minor royal engagements had triggered speculation among reporters who made their living reading the subtle signs of royal crisis. By midnight, online forums dedicated to royal watching were buzzing with theories ranging from security threats to family emergencies. Miranda's 30 years of experience in communications had taught her that successful crisis management required staying ahead of speculation while maintaining credibility through careful truth-telling. The king's diagnosis presented unique challenges because medical privacy needed to be balanced with constitutional transparency. Public concern needed to be addressed without creating panic, and international implications needed management without diplomatic complications. Her strategy would need to unfold in carefully orchestrated phases over several days. The first phase began with a brief statement released at 8 a.m., designed to acknowledge the speculation while buying time for more comprehensive communication. The statement confirmed that His Majesty would be making an important announcement later in the day, that the royal family was unified in supporting whatever challenges lay ahead, and that normal constitutional functions would continue without interruption. The careful language was designed to calm immediate concerns while preparing the public for more significant news. Dr. Thornfield arrived at the private clinic in Harley Street for the medical consultations that would determine the king's treatment plan. She was accompanied by Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Matthews, the senior protection officer who coordinated royal security during medical appointments. The clinic had been chosen for its combination of medical excellence and ability to accommodate the security and privacy requirements that royal healthcare demanded. The building had been quietly prepared over the previous 24 hours, with discreet security sweeps and communication protocols established. The lead oncologist, Professor David Chun, had treated members of various European royal families during his distinguished career and understood both the medical complexities and the constitutional sensitivities involved in royal healthcare. His reputation for discretion was matched only by his clinical expertise, making him the natural choice for coordinating the king's treatment. The morning consultation would determine not just medical protocols, but also the timeline and logistics that would shape the monarchy's public response. Prince William had spent the night at Windsor Castle, using the early morning hours to receive briefings on constitutional protocols that might become relevant in the coming weeks or months. His role as heir apparent carried responsibilities that extended beyond family support to include preparation for potential assumption of additional duties. The briefings covered the legal frameworks for royal delegation, the procedures for regency if it became necessary, and the international protocols that govern Commonwealth leadership during health crises. The constitutional experts who briefed Prince William represented centuries of accumulated knowledge about how monarchies managed health challenges while maintaining institutional stability. Historical precedents were reviewed, from King George VI's health struggles during World War II to more recent examples from other European monarchies. Each case provided lessons about balancing transparency with privacy, managing succession concerns, and maintaining public confidence during uncertain periods. Princess Charlotte had assumed responsibility for managing family communications, ensuring that extended family members and close friends received information through appropriate channels before public announcements began. Her task list included the king's cousins, various European royal relatives, longtime friends who had supported the family through previous challenges, and charitable organizations that depended on royal patronage for their operations. Each conversation required careful calibration of information sharing based on relationship closeness and discretion reliability. The extended royal family's response revealed the network of relationships that had sustained the monarchy through generations of challenge and change. The king's cousin, the Duke of Gloucester, immediately offered to assume additional ceremonial duties, while the Princess Royal adjusted her schedule to provide backup for any engagements that might require modification. The family's instinctive response demonstrated the institutional resilience that had enabled constitutional monarchy to adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining essential continuity. Prince Michael's role focused on liaison with the financial and business communities that might be affected by royal family developments. His investment experience had given him understanding of how unexpected news could affect market confidence, institutional stability, and international business relationships. His morning meetings with key figures in the City of London were designed to provide reassurance that constitutional functions would continue normally regardless of personal family circumstances. The business community's response reflected the complex relationship between hereditary institutions and modern economic systems. While direct economic impacts were likely to be minimal, the psychological effects of royal family stability on business confidence required careful management. Prince Michael's meetings emphasized continuity, competence, and the institutional frameworks that insulated essential functions from individual circumstances. Prime Minister Richardson convened an emergency cabinet meeting at 10 a.m. to brief senior government officials on the constitutional implications of the king's diagnosis. The meeting operated under the strict confidentiality protocols that govern sensitive state business, with each minister understanding that premature disclosure could affect both market stability and public confidence. The Prime Minister's approach emphasized preparation for various scenarios while maintaining normal governmental operations. The cabinet discussion revealed the intricate connections between constitutional monarchy and democratic governance that most citizens took for granted. The king's role in government was largely ceremonial, but his constitutional functions were essential for the legal framework that enabled parliamentary democracy. Ministers needed to understand how potential health-related limitations might affect legislative business, state ceremonies, and international diplomatic functions. The Attorney General provided briefings on the legal mechanisms available for managing royal duties during health challenges, from simple delegation of specific functions to the more complex procedures for establishing regency, if it became necessary. The constitutional frameworks were well established but rarely used, requiring careful explanation of procedures that existed more in legal theory than practical experience. Each scenario carried different implications for governmental operations and constitutional stability. The Foreign Secretary began consultations with Commonwealth partners, using secured diplomatic channels to provide preliminary briefings before public announcements began. The king's role as head of the Commonwealth required coordination with 15 nations where he served as head of state, each with its own constitutional arrangements and political considerations. The diplomatic challenges involved managing information flow while preventing speculation that might affect political stability in countries with their own domestic challenges. The international response began with the closest Commonwealth partners, where constitutional arrangements created direct connections to the British Crown. Canada, Australia, and New Zealand required immediate consultation because their governmental systems included the monarch as head of state, making his health a matter of constitutional significance rather than mere personal concern. The governors-general in each country needed briefing to prepare for questions about constitutional continuity and governmental stability. Back at Windsor Castle, the king spent the afternoon reviewing the statement that would formally announce his diagnosis to the nation and the world. The draft had been prepared by Miranda Walsh in consultation with constitutional experts, medical advisors, and family members, but the final language required the king's personal approval. His approach to the statement reflected the same directness and dignity that had characterized his approach to other challenging moments during his reign. The statement's language was carefully crafted to provide necessary information while maintaining appropriate privacy, to acknowledge the seriousness of the situation while emphasizing continuity and stability, and to express gratitude for support while managing expectations about future developments. Every word was scrutinized for potential misinterpretation. Every phrase was tested against possible public reactions, and every sentence was evaluated for its impact on both domestic and international audiences. Queen Isabella's role in preparing the statement reflected her deep understanding of public communication developed over 4 decades of royal duty. Her suggestions focused on the tone and emotional resonance that would help the public process difficult news while maintaining confidence in institutional stability. Her experience had taught her that successful royal communication required balancing personal humanity with constitutional dignity, showing appropriate vulnerability while demonstrating continuing strength. The afternoon medical consultation confirmed the treatment plan that would guide the king's health care over the coming months. Professor Chun explained the protocols, timelines, and success rates associated with the recommended approach, while also discussing the modifications that would be necessary to accommodate royal duties and security requirements. The treatment would be demanding but offered good prospects for successful management of the condition. The security implications of the medical treatment required extensive coordination between royal protection officers, hospital security teams, and medical staff. Detective Chief Inspector Matthews had spent the day developing protocols that would enable the king to receive necessary medical care while maintaining the protection levels that royal status required. The arrangements involved everything from secure transportation routes to communication systems that would enable continuation of essential constitutional functions during treatment periods. Media preparation reached intensive levels as the afternoon progressed, with news organizations worldwide preparing for coverage that would dominate headlines for days or weeks. The Palace Press Office coordinated with major broadcasters to ensure appropriate coverage frameworks, provided background briefings to senior correspondents about royal health protocols, and established communication schedules that would manage information flow over the extended period that the story would command public attention. The BBC began special programming preparations, understanding that the announcement would require interruption of normal broadcasting schedules and extensive analysis of constitutional, medical, and historical implications. Royal correspondents were briefed on the background information they would need for comprehensive coverage, while constitutional experts were contacted to provide analysis of the governmental and institutional implications that would concern serious news audiences. International media organizations began their own preparation efforts, with American, European, and Commonwealth broadcasters recognizing that the story would require sustained coverage adapted to their own audience's interests and understanding. The global fascination with British royalty meant that the king's health would become international news, requiring coordination between the Palace Press Office and foreign correspondents to ensure accurate information flow and appropriate cultural sensitivity. As the afternoon moved toward evening, Windsor Castle prepared for the moment when private family business would become public knowledge and personal medical challenges would become matters of constitutional significance. The king's diagnosis had already changed everything within the palace walls, but the approaching announcement would extend those changes to the nation and the world, beginning a period of uncertainty, adjustment, and ultimate demonstration of institutional resilience that would test everyone involved. The final hours before the announcement were spent in careful coordination between all the various elements that would need to function smoothly once the news became public. Medical teams prepared for intense scrutiny. Security services adjusted their planning for changed circumstances. Government officials prepared for constitutional questions, and family members steeled themselves for the personal challenges of managing private medical concerns under unprecedented public attention. The sun set over Windsor Castle on what would be remembered as the last day when the king's health was private family business rather than matter of national and international concern, marking the end of one phase of the crisis and the beginning of another that would test the strength and adaptability of institutions built over centuries, but challenged by circumstances that no amount of tradition could have fully anticipated. At exactly 6 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, television screens across the nation cut away from regular programming as the familiar notes of the national anthem played over images of the royal standard flying above Windsor Castle. The announcement that followed would be remembered as one of the most significant royal communications in decades, delivered with the dignity and directness that had characterized the king's 15-year reign, but carrying news that would fundamentally alter the monarchy's immediate future. The king appeared seated at his desk in the same study where, just days earlier, he had received Dr. Thornfield's life-changing diagnosis. His appearance was carefully considered, formal enough to convey the gravity of the situation, yet personal enough to maintain the connection with his subjects that had defined his approach to constitutional monarchy. Behind him, the familiar family photographs and state gifts created a backdrop that spoke of continuity even as the words he was about to speak announced significant change. "My dear people," the king began, using the formal address that tradition demanded but infusing it with the personal warmth that his subjects had come to expect. "It is my duty to share with you news that affects not only my family, but the institution we have served together for the past 15 years. Following recent medical examinations, my doctors have diagnosed a serious but treatable health condition that will require intensive medical care over the coming months." The words landed across the nation like stones dropped into still water, creating ripples that would spread far beyond the immediate moment. In living rooms from Scotland to Cornwall, families gathered around television sets as they had for royal weddings and jubilee celebrations, but this time absorbing news that carried uncertainty rather than celebration. The king's calm delivery could not disguise the magnitude of what he was sharing, and the nation began the collective process of adjusting to news that touched both personal and constitutional concerns. "I want to be clear about several important matters," the king continued, his voice maintaining the steady authority that had guided the country through previous challenges. "First, my medical team has assured me that this condition, while serious, can be effectively treated with modern medical techniques. I will be receiving the finest care available, and I am optimistic about the outcome. Second, I am determined that this personal challenge will not interfere with the constitutional duties that bind us together as a nation." The constitutional implications of the king's words were immediately apparent to government officials, constitutional scholars, and political commentators who understood that royal health was never purely personal matter. In the House of Commons, where evening debates continued, conversations stopped as members absorbed news that would require careful consideration of procedures and protocols that existed more in legal theory than practical experience. Prime Minister Richardson watched the announcement from her Downing Street study, surrounded by advisors who had spent the day preparing for the public reaction and governmental response that would follow. Her immediate statement, released within minutes of the king's announcement, emphasized continuity of government, constitutional stability, and the nation's unified support for their monarch's recovery. The speed and content of her response reflected the careful coordination that had occurred between palace and government throughout the crisis. Third, the king continued, "I have complete confidence in my family's ability to support the increased responsibilities that my treatment may require. The Prince of Wales is prepared to assume additional duties as needed, and my other children stand ready to serve the nation in whatever capacity proves helpful. The institution of monarchy is larger than any individual. and its strength lies in our collective commitment to service. Prince William watched his father's announcement from the drawing room at Kensington Palace, surrounded by his own family and the senior staff who would help him navigate the expanded role that his father's words had just publicly acknowledged. The heir apparent's preparation for eventual kingship had been gradual and careful, but circumstances were now requiring an acceleration of that process that would test both his readiness and his ability to balance increased constitutional duties with his existing responsibilities. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Buckingham Palace's telephone system was flooded with calls from well-wishers. The official website crashed under the volume of visitors seeking additional information, and social media platforms filled with messages of support that demonstrated the genuine affection that the king had earned during his 15-year reign. The outpouring reflected not just personal concern for their monarch, but recognition that his health represented stability and continuity in an uncertain world. News organizations worldwide scrambled to provide context and analysis for audiences trying to understand the implications of the announcement. Constitutional experts were called upon to explain the legal frameworks that governed royal health challenges. Medical specialists discussed treatment options and prognosis, and political commentators analyzed the potential impact on governance and institutional stability. The story dominated international headlines, reflecting the global fascination with British royalty and recognition that the king's health carried implications far beyond Britain's borders. The Commonwealth nations responded with statements of support that revealed the complex emotions surrounding their shared constitutional arrangements. In countries where Republican movements had gained political strength, the king's diagnosis prompted renewed discussions about constitutional independence and the relevance of monarchy in the 21st century. However, the immediate response was overwhelmingly supportive, with government leaders expressing personal concern and institutional solidarity. Queen Isabella's role during the hours following the announcement demonstrated the skills she had developed during 4 decades as queen consort. She coordinated family responses to the flood of support messages, managed the logistics of increased media attention, and provided the emotional stability that enabled other family members to focus on their expanding duties. Her composure under pressure had been tested many times during previous royal crises, but never under circumstances that combined such personal and constitutional significance. The financial market's response reflected the complex relationship between monarchical stability and economic confidence in constitutional democracies. While direct economic impacts were minimal, the psychological effects of uncertainty about royal leadership prompted careful monitoring by Treasury officials and Bank of England analysts. The pound sterling remained stable, but trading volume increased as investors processed news that touched fundamental questions about institutional continuity. Princess Charlotte's charitable organizations faced immediate questions about the future of projects that depended on royal patronage and personal involvement. Her response demonstrated both personal concern for her father and professional understanding of the responsibilities that came with royal status. She issued statements confirming her continued commitment to existing projects while acknowledging that family circumstances might require some scheduling adjustments. Prince Michael's business interests required careful navigation of the line between royal duty and commercial activity that his dual role had always demanded. His partners and investors needed reassurance that political uncertainty would not affect business operations, while his royal responsibilities required increased availability for ceremonial duties that other family members might be unable to fulfill. His response balanced these competing demands with the diplomatic skills that royal training had instilled. The evening news broadcasts provided comprehensive coverage that attempted to balance public interest with respect for medical privacy, constitutional analysis with human interest, and immediate reaction with long-term implications. The BBC's special coverage included interviews with constitutional historians who placed the king's announcement in historical context, medical experts who explained treatment options without violating privacy, and political analysts who discussed governmental implications without engaging in harmful speculation. Religious leaders across the nation and throughout the Commonwealth offered prayers and support that reflected both personal concern and recognition of the king's role as supreme governor of the Church of England. The Archbishop of Canterbury's statement emphasized healing, faith, and the strength that community support could provide during challenging periods. Similar messages came from leaders of other faiths, demonstrating the interfaith respect that the king had cultivated during his reign. International diplomatic responses revealed the global implications of British royal stability. European monarchs offered personal support and professional solidarity, while elected leaders from Republican nations expressed respect for the king's service and hope for his recovery. The responses reflected not just diplomatic courtesy but genuine recognition that British constitutional stability contributed to international political stability in an increasingly uncertain world. The medical team coordinating the king's treatment faced unprecedented challenges in providing health care under intense public scrutiny. Professor Chun and his colleagues had treated high-profile patients before, but never had they dealt with the combination of medical complexity, security requirements, and constitutional implications that the king's case presented. Their approach emphasized both medical excellence and the discretion that effective treatment would require. Palace security arrangements required comprehensive review and modification to accommodate the king's treatment schedule while maintaining the protection levels that royal status demanded. Detective Chief Inspector Matthews coordinated with hospital security teams, medical staff, and government security agencies to develop protocols that would enable necessary medical care without compromising either royal safety or operational security. The arrangements involved everything from secure transportation to communication systems that would function during treatment periods. The evening concluded with the royal family gathering once again at Windsor Castle, their first opportunity to be together since the announcement that had made their private medical crisis a matter of public concern. The king's approach to the family meeting reflected his determination to maintain normal relationships despite the changed circumstances, while also acknowledging the increased pressures that each family member would face in the coming months. As midnight approached, Britain began its first day of living with the knowledge that their monarch faced a serious health challenge, that constitutional arrangements might require activation of procedures designed for such circumstances, and that the coming months would test both personal resilience and institutional strength. The announcement had been made, the immediate reactions had been processed, and the long period of uncertainty, treatment, and ultimate resolution had begun. The response to the king's announcement demonstrated both the deep affection that he had earned from his subjects and the institutional strength that constitutional monarchy had developed over centuries of adaptation to changing circumstances. The combination of personal support and constitutional stability would be tested in the coming months, but the initial response suggested that both the individual and the institution possessed the resilience necessary to navigate the challenges ahead. The late evening hours brought a sense of completion to the communication phase of the crisis and the beginning of the implementation phase that would determine how effectively the monarchy could balance personal medical needs with constitutional duties. Tomorrow would bring the first full day of living with public knowledge of the king's diagnosis, and the beginning of a period that would test everyone involved in ways that no amount of preparation could fully anticipate. 6 months after the announcement that shook the nation, the early morning mist once again hung over the gardens of Windsor Castle, but the atmosphere within the ancient walls had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. The king stood at the same window where he had contemplated his diagnosis, but his posture reflected the strength that had returned through months of treatment, family support, and the unwavering dedication of his medical team. The journey from crisis to recovery had tested every aspect of the constitutional monarchy, ultimately demonstrating both human resilience and institutional adaptability. The treatment had proceeded according to Professor Chin's carefully planned protocols, with each phase managed to balance medical necessity with constitutional duty. The king had maintained his essential functions throughout the process, though the public had grown accustomed to seeing Prince William at increasingly prominent state occasions. The heir apparent's graceful assumption of expanded responsibilities had provided stability while allowing his father to focus on recovery, demonstrating the succession planning that constitutional monarchy required. Dr. Thornfield's morning rounds at Windsor had become routine over the past months, but today carried special significance as she delivered the news that both medical analysis and family hopes had anticipated. The latest test results confirmed what recent weeks had suggested. The treatment had been successful beyond even optimistic projections. The king's condition had responded excellently to the medical protocols, and, while ongoing monitoring would remain necessary, the immediate crisis had passed. The queen's role throughout the ordeal had revealed depths of strength and organizational ability that even decades of royal service had not fully tested. She had coordinated family schedules, managed increased media attention, and provided the emotional anchor that enabled everyone else to fulfill their expanding responsibilities. Her morning routine in the Rose Garden had continued throughout the crisis, providing both personal solace and visible symbol of continuity that the public had found reassuring. Prince William's evolution during his father's treatment had accelerated his preparation for eventual kingship in ways that normal circumstances would have required years to accomplish. His handling of state functions, ceremonial duties, and international relations had earned respect from government officials, foreign dignitaries, and the public who had watched him grow into expanded responsibilities with grace and competence. The experience had transformed him from heir-in-waiting to constitutional partner. Princess Charlotte's charitable organizations had not only continued their work, but had expanded their reach, as public sympathy for the royal family translated into increased support for causes they championed. Her management of both family responsibilities and professional commitments had demonstrated the modern royal approach to duty, balancing traditional service with contemporary relevance. Her work during the crisis had enhanced both her personal reputation and the monarchy's public standing. Prince Michael's dual role in business and royal duty had provided valuable perspective during family strategy sessions, bringing analytical skills and contemporary understanding to decisions that balanced personal concerns with institutional requirements. His successful management of both spheres had shown how modern royalty could contribute meaningfully to society while fulfilling traditional obligations. His experience had proved invaluable in navigating the complex implications of constitutional crisis. The palace communication strategy had evolved throughout the crisis, with Miranda Walsh's team developing new approaches to royal media relations that balanced transparency with privacy more effectively than previous protocols. The sustained media attention had required innovative management techniques, but the result had been increased public understanding of both royal humanity and constitutional importance. The communications success had become a model for constitutional monarchies worldwide. Prime Minister Richardson's coordination with the palace throughout the crisis had strengthened the relationship between elected government and hereditary monarchy in ways that benefited both institutions. The constitutional arrangements had functioned smoothly, demonstrating that democratic governance and royal tradition could adapt to unexpected circumstances while maintaining stability and effectiveness. The collaboration had enhanced public confidence in both governmental and monarchical institutions. The Commonwealth response to the king's illness and recovery had revealed the continuing relevance of shared constitutional arrangements in an era when many observers had questioned their contemporary significance. The support from 15 nations had demonstrated emotional and institutional connections that transcended purely formal relationships. The experience had strengthened Commonwealth bonds and renewed appreciation for the constitutional monarchy that provided common ground across diverse societies. International diplomatic relations had been enhanced rather than damaged by the crisis, as the king's dignity during illness and the family's effective management of responsibilities had earned respect from both monarchical and republican governments worldwide. The successful navigation of constitutional challenge had demonstrated institutional maturity and adaptability that strengthened Britain's international standing. Foreign governments had gained increased appreciation for constitutional monarchy stability. The medical team's management of royal health care under unprecedented public scrutiny had established new protocols that balanced patient privacy with constitutional transparency. Professor Chin's leadership had ensured excellent medical outcomes while maintaining the discretion that future royal healthcare would require. The experience had enhanced both medical practice and constitutional procedure in ways that would benefit future generations. Security arrangements had evolved throughout the crisis, with Detective Chief Inspector Matthews developing new protocols that accommodated medical treatment while maintaining royal protection standards. The enhanced security procedures had functioned effectively without interfering with either medical care or public duties. The innovations would become permanent improvements to royal protection services. The financial market's response to royal health crisis and recovery had demonstrated the psychological connections between monarchical stability and economic confidence in constitutional democracies. The minimal actual impact but significant perceived importance had highlighted the monarchy's continuing relevance to institutional stability. The experience had provided valuable lessons about managing economic implications of constitutional uncertainty. Religious and community leaders' support throughout the crisis had revealed the monarchy's continuing role in national unity and social cohesion. The interfaith response had demonstrated the king's success in representing all citizens regardless of religious background. The community support had strengthened social bonds and renewed appreciation for shared institutions. The anniversary of the diagnosis approached with the royal family stronger and more unified than many observers had thought possible 6 months earlier. The crisis had tested relationships, revealed character, and ultimately demonstrated that both individual resilience and institutional strength could overcome challenges that had initially seemed overwhelming. The experience had prepared everyone involved for future challenges with increased confidence and proven capabilities. Public opinion polls reflected unprecedented support for both the king personally and the monarchy as an institution, with the crisis having humanized the royal family while demonstrating their continued constitutional importance. The balance between sympathy and respect had strengthened emotional connections between crown and citizens. The monarchy emerged from crisis with enhanced legitimacy and renewed relevance. The king's first major public appearance since completing treatment was scheduled for the following week, a carefully planned return to full public duties that would mark the end of the crisis period and the beginning of a new phase of his reign. The event would demonstrate both personal recovery and constitutional continuity, providing closure to a chapter that had tested everyone involved. As the morning mist lifted from Windsor Castle's gardens, revealing the same carefully maintained grounds that had provided continuity throughout centuries of change, the king prepared for a day that would include reviewing government papers, meeting with Commonwealth representatives, and planning the expanded charitable initiatives that his experience had inspired. His approach to the morning routine reflected both gratitude for recovery and determination to use his experience for positive impact. The constitutional monarchy had faced its test and had emerged not merely intact but strengthened, demonstrating that institutions built on centuries of experience could adapt to contemporary challenges while maintaining essential functions and values. The crisis had revealed both human vulnerability and institutional resilience, ultimately proving that the combination of personal dignity and constitutional wisdom could overcome circumstances that no amount of tradition could have anticipated. The lessons learned during 6 months of crisis would influence royal practice, government procedure, and constitutional understanding for generations to come, providing practical experience in managing challenges that legal frameworks anticipated but rarely faced. The successful navigation of medical crisis, family unity, and constitutional continuity would serve as precedent for future challenges and inspiration for other constitutional monarchies facing similar tests. The king's recovery had become not just personal triumph, but institutional validation, demonstrating that constitutional monarchy remained relevant and effective in addressing contemporary challenges while maintaining historical continuity and democratic legitimacy. The experience had strengthened not only the royal family, but the constitutional arrangements that had served the nation for centuries. Windsor Castle settled into its evening routine, but the satisfaction of crisis overcome and responsibilities successfully maintained provided a sense of accomplishment that would endure long after the specific events had become historical memory. The monarchy had faced its greatest contemporary test and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more unified, prepared for whatever challenges the future might bring with the confidence that comes from proven resilience and demonstrated capability.